The smell of burnt coffee and antiseptic is something most people tune out after their first week in a hospital. Nadia never could, even after 4 years on the night shift at St. Michael's. The scent hit her the same way every single time she walked through the staff entrance, a reminder of exactly where she was and exactly how little anyone expected of her. She wasn't a doctor. She wasn't even close. She was 26 years old, a registered practical nurse from Sudbury who had moved to Toronto with $70 in her bank account and a brother who needed dialysis 3 times a week. She wore second-hand Danskos and kept her dark hair in a braid so tight it gave her headaches, because loose hair was a liability in the ICU and she couldn't afford a second pair of scrubs to replace one if it got snagged. Nobody noticed Nadia Okafor at St. Michael's. That was until the night Christian Mansetti's daughter stopped breathing. The call came in at 11:47. Nadia was in the supply room counting saline bags, a task her supervisor assigned her because it required no judgment and could be done alone, when the overhead PA crackled to life. Code blue, pediatric VIP suite, 4th floor. All available staff. Code blue. She ran. The VIP corridor at St. Michael's was different from the rest of the hospital in the way that a hotel lobby is different from a bus station. The floors were travertine. The overhead lights were warm instead of fluorescent. There were actual paintings on the walls, still lifes of fruit and rolling countryside that someone had paid real money for. None of that mattered tonight. Every inch of that corridor was now packed with men in dark suits who wore their silence like armor. And in the center of it all, behind the double doors of Suite 412, a child was dying. Nadia pushed through the doors and stopped so abruptly that the nurse behind her walked into her back. She counted 11 physicians in that room. 11. She recognized Dr. Harrison Webb, the chief of pediatric medicine, a man who had written 3 textbooks and whose name appeared on the wall of the hospital's donor wing. Beside him stood 2 specialists flown in from Vancouver General and 2 more she didn't recognize, still wearing their coats as though they'd arrived from the airport within the hour. Monitors screamed. IV poles crowded the bed like a metal forest. A respiratory therapist was bagging a child by hand, squeezing the mask over the small face in a rhythm that was too fast, too desperate. The girl was 7 years old. Her name was Elisa. Nadia knew this because she had been admitted 3 days ago with what the chart called a routine post-surgical infection following an appendectomy, and Nadia had been assigned to her overnight observations twice. Elisa had dark curly hair and a stuffed rabbit named Humphrey, and she had asked Nadia to fix Humphrey's ear, which had come partially unstuffed, so Nadia had borrowed a suture kit and done exactly that. Elisa was not conscious now. She was not holding Humphrey. Her lips had gone a color that turned Nadia's stomach. Standing at the window, perfectly still in a way that made everything in the room seem louder by contrast, was a man Nadia had never seen on this floor before. He was tall, broad-shouldered in the way of someone who had been physically large for so long that their body had simply arranged itself around that fact. He wore a charcoal suit that sat on him the way expensive things sit on men who are used to expensive things, naturally, without effort. His hair was dark and there was gray at the temples, and his jaw was set so hard it looked carved. She knew who he was. Everyone in Toronto knew who Christian Mansetti was, the same way everyone knew the CN Tower or the 401 at rush hour. You didn't have to seek out that knowledge. It found you. He owned half the private development on the lakeshore he donated to hospitals and women's shelters and university endowments. He was photographed at galas with politicians who smiled too wide beside him. And underneath all of it, in the places that didn't make the society pages, it was understood that Christian Mansetti was the kind of man whose handshake carried the weight of things that couldn't be written down. His daughter was the only family he had left. Her mother had died 2 years ago. There were no siblings, no cousins Nadia had ever heard of. Just Elisa and her stuffed rabbit and her father, who reportedly had not left the hospital in 72 hours. Nadia took a step toward the bed. A hand clamped down on her shoulder. "You're not needed in here." It was one of the suits. He didn't look at her when he said it. His eyes swept the room in the mechanical way of someone cataloging exits. "I've been on her observations for 3 nights, Nadia said. "I know her chart. She has 11 doctors. I know." Nadia looked at the monitors. Her stomach dropped to somewhere around her knees. "That's what worries me." From the window, the man spoke for the first time. His voice was low, and it did something to the temperature of the room that Nadia couldn't explain. The hand left her shoulder. Dr. Webb turned from the bed, his face red and glistening, with the particular frustration of a brilliant man encountering a problem that refuses to respond to brilliance. "Mr. Mansetti, this is a sterile environment. We don't need—" I said, "Let her through, doctor." The words were quiet. They were not a repetition. They were a correction. Nadia walked to the bed. She looked at Elisa. She looked at the monitors. She looked at the IV lines running into the child's arm. And then she looked at something the 11 physicians had not thought to look at, the color of the skin at the injection site. Not blue, not gray, but a very specific dull red with a faint white ring, like a bruise forming from the inside out. She had seen that exact color once before, not at St. Michael's but at her aunt's kitchen table in Sudbury when she was 15, and her cousin had reacted to a penicillin injection at a walk-in clinic, and they had not caught it for 47 minutes. She turned to the medication tray. She read the IV bag label. She read it again. "Who authorized the amoxil push at 9:15? Nadia asked. No one answered immediately. The respiratory therapist kept bagging. The monitors kept screaming. "I'm asking because it matters," Nadia said. Her voice was steadier than she felt. "Who switched her antibiotic protocol?" Dr. Webb stepped forward. "The patient was unresponsive to the original course. We escalated per standard protocol. Did anyone run an allergy cross-reference?" Nadia asked. Her intake form indicated no known allergies. Her intake form was filled out at admission by a staff assistant, Nadia said. She kept her voice flat. She kept her hand still. "I spoke with Elisa 3 days ago. I was doing her intake observations and she told me unprompted that she was allergic to something that made her throat close. I asked her what it was and she said she didn't know the name, but it was what the dentist gave her last year and it made her throat feel like it was shrinking." Silence. Children describe penicillin derivatives as the dentist medicine because that is the most common context in which they encounter them, Nadia continued. "Her file has an allergy flag I raised at 11:30 last night. It is in the secondary notes, not the front page. The secondary notes 11 pairs of eyes moved to the chart. We need to pull the line and push epinephrine, Nadia said. Now, the anaphylaxis is delayed because of the slow IV rate, but it is progressing and it is going to hit her airway fully in the next 4 minutes. Dr. Webb opened his mouth. She's right. The voice came from the window. Christian Mansetti had not moved, but his eyes were locked on Nadia with an intensity that made the room feel smaller. Do what she says. Mr. Mansetti, I cannot allow a practical nurse to direct the course of... Pull the line, Christian said. Each word was its own sentence. Dr. Webb stared at him for 2 full seconds, then he turned to the bed. Pull the line. Prep the epi. Move. The room became organized chaos, which was different from the disorganized chaos of a moment ago. Nadia stepped to the side. She stayed close to the bed. She watched Elisa's face. 60 seconds after the epinephrine push, the color began to come back. Not quickly, not dramatically. It was a slow creep, like watercolor bleeding across paper. The dull blue at Elisa's lips faded. The oxygen sats on the monitor began slowly to climb. Nadia felt her legs go soft underneath her. She grabbed the bed rail. She held on. Elisa's eyelids fluttered. The room exhaled. Nadia was the only person in the room still looking at the child's face when Elisa's eyes opened. Dark brown eyes, confused and frightened and gummy with the residue of unconsciousness. Her small hand reached blindly sideways and found nothing. And then she made a sound that was more breath than word. Humphrey. Nadia reached into the pocket of her scrub top where she had put the rabbit before her shift began. A habit she developed because Elisa always asked for him first thing, and there was no reason to make a sick child wait. She pressed the rabbit into Elisa's hand. Elisa's fingers closed around him, and she went still. Nadia looked up. Christian Mansetti was standing at the foot of the bed. He had crossed the room without her noticing, which should not have been possible for a man that size. He was looking at his daughter's hand wrapped around the small stuffed rabbit. He didn't say anything for a long time. Then, how long has she had that rabbit? Since before I was assigned to her, Nadia said. 3 nights minimum. She calls him Humphrey. I reattached his ear on Tuesday. A muscle moved in Christian's jaw. She's had it since her mother died. He paused. She sleeps with it every night. Nadia didn't say anything. The doctors, Christian said, his voice perfectly even, didn't know about the rabbit. No, sir. But you did. I talked to her, Nadia said. During night obs. She has trouble sleeping. I talked to her. Christian looked at her for a long moment. Then he turned to Dr. Webb, who had removed his glasses and was polishing them in the way of a man who needs something to do with his hands. Send me your billing information, Christian said. All 11 of you. If any invoice arrives for tonight, I will ensure that the College of Physicians becomes aware of a secondary notes protocol failure that nearly killed a 7-year-old child. He replaced his jacket button. You have 10 minutes to clear this floor. Dr. Webb said nothing. He left. The others followed in the shuffling, deflated way of men whose authority had just been quietly removed from them. The room emptied. When the last white coat disappeared through the double doors, the only people remaining were Christian, his 2 bodyguards, Elisa in the bed, and Nadia. Elisa had fallen back asleep. Her oxygen sat at 96%. Her color was good. Her hand still held the rabbit. You should have been louder, Christian said. He was looking at his daughter, not at Nadia. "When you found the allergy flag, you should have pushed harder." "I raised it through the proper channel," Nadia said. "The secondary notes system, which no one reads, which I understand now." She swallowed. "I should have gone directly to the attending. I didn't because I was new on her case and I didn't want to be seen as overstepping." Christian turned to look at her. His eyes were dark, the kind of dark that had a quality to it, like water that was deeper than it looked. "What is your name?" "Nadia." He said nothing for a moment. Then, "What do you need, Nadia Okafor?" The question surprised her so completely that she almost didn't answer it. "I'm sorry. You saved my daughter's life. In my experience, people who do that want something." His voice was not unkind. It was matter of fact, the way of a man who had learned to deal in what was real. "What do you need?" Nadia thought of her brother Kofi at Sunnybrook. 3 dialysis sessions a week. The parking fees alone eating $40 out of every paycheck she sent him. She thought of the 1-bedroom in Etobicoke she shared with a roommate she'd never met properly, because their schedules never overlapped. She thought of the second-hand Danskos with the left heel coming apart. "I need Elisa to stay on my observation rotation," she said. "I know her. She's going to need monitoring for the next 48 hours, and I am not going to sleep until I know she's stable." Christian stared at her. Something shifted in his expression that she couldn't read. "That's what you want," he said. "That's what I need," Nadia said. "You asked what I need." A very long silence followed. Then, slowly, something that might have been a smile moved at the corner of his mouth, though it didn't quite arrive. "Sit down," he said. "She'll sleep for a few hours. I should check the monitors. I know. Sit down anyway." She sat in the chair beside the bed. Christian sat in the one opposite. The distance between them was exactly the width of his daughter, unconscious and breathing evenly between them. "You work nights," he said, 4 on 3 off, and outside of here." Nadia looked at him. "I'm sorry? You have someone, a family." It wasn't a question, but it felt like one. "My brother," she said. "He's in treatment. I send him money when I can." Christian nodded slowly. He didn't offer anything in return, which she found, unexpectedly, to be the right response. Most people said "I'm sorry," which she had always found useless. He simply acknowledged the weight of it and moved on. At 2 in the morning, Elisa woke up briefly, asked for water, drank half a cup, said thank you to no one in particular, and went back to sleep. Nadia checked her vitals, everything held. At 3, Christian's phone lit up. He answered it with 2 words, "I'll call," and hung up. "You should go," Nadia said. "I'll stay with her. I know you'll stay with her." He set the phone face down on his knee. "That's not the issue." "What's the issue?" He was quiet for a moment. "The antibiotic protocol wasn't a mistake," he said. "The form was altered. The allergy flag that you entered, it was deleted from the secondary system at 11:58 last night. Someone restored the clean version of her chart." Nadia felt the floor tilt beneath her. Derated. "My security team does routine sweeps of her medical records. We noticed it at midnight. I was trying to find out who had access to the system when the alarm went off." His jaw tightened. Someone wanted her to die here, in a hospital, in a way that would look like natural causes. The warmth had gone out of the room. Nadia looked at Elisa sleeping with her rabbit and felt a wave of protectiveness so fierce it shocked her. "Who?" she asked. "That's what I am working to find out. And in the meantime," Christian said, "she doesn't leave my sight. And neither do you. I have a shift. You don't anymore." He said it simply, without cruelty. The people who tampered with her chart know that someone in this hospital noticed the discrepancy. If they pulled the deletion logs, they will know the flag was originally entered by you. You've been in this room for 3 hours. Your face is on every camera on this floor." Nadia sat very still. "You are not in danger if you stay close to me," Christian said. "You are only in danger if you go home." She thought about that for a moment. She thought about Kofi. She thought about her roommate, asleep in Etobicoke, who had nothing to do with any of this. "My brother," she said. "I can have someone with him by morning." She looked at him. "You don't know where he is." "I know he's at Sunnybrook," Christian said. "Dialysis, Mondays, Wednesdays, Fridays." Nadia said nothing. "I run background on the medical staff who have access to Elisa's room," he said. "It is not personal. It is standard." It was so far outside the world she lived in that she didn't have a framework for it. She processed it the way you process extreme cold, by going very still and breathing carefully. "Okay," she said. He looked at her. "Okay, I want daily updates on Kofi's situation. You'll have them. And I want to be present for every medical decision involving Elisa for as long as I am here. Not as a nurse, as someone who knows her. You don't override me on her care." This time the almost smile arrived more fully. It changed his face in a way that was inconveniently, very difficult to look away from. "All right, Nadia Okafor," he said. "We have a deal." They left the hospital at dawn. The convoy moved north through the early grey Toronto morning. The 401. then up through forest and private road to a property north of Barry that did not appear on any real estate listing Nadia had ever seen. It sat at the edge of a lake, pale stone and dark glass, long and low like it had grown there rather than been built. Elisa was transferred to a private medical suite on the second floor, equipped with monitoring equipment that rivaled anything at St. Michael's. A physician Nadia had not met before, a quiet woman named Dr. Abina, who spoke to Nadia as an equal without being told to. Nadia watched the first handover, asked 3 questions, got 3 direct answers, and decided she trusted her. Kofi called at 8 that morning. There were 2 men outside his apartment building, he said. Polite, quiet. They had introduced themselves as security staff and handed him a letter with Christian's signature. Nadia? Kofi said, his voice careful in the way it got when he was trying not to alarm her. What did you do? I'll explain later, she said. Are you okay? I'm fine. They drove me to dialysis. A pause. Nadia. I know, she said. I'll explain later, I promise. The property operated like a small, self-contained world. There was a housekeeper named Mrs. Kamau who ran the household with the quiet authority of someone who had been doing it for 20 years and found nothing surprising about it. There was a full kitchen, a library with actual books in it, a garden that ran down to the lake and was full of things that were still blooming despite the October cold. Elisa recovered. It didn't happen all at once. There were 2 days of careful monitoring, of Nadia sitting beside her bed during the night checks while Dr. Abina managed the daytime, of Elisa asking for Humphrey every morning before she opened her eyes fully and smiling, a small tired smile when he was already there. But by the 4th day, Elisa was sitting up and eating and asking whether Nadia could teach her to braid, because her braid was always so neat and Elisa's was always crooked. So Nadia taught her to braid. They sat on the window seat in the medical suite, the lake going silver in the afternoon light, and Nadia walked her through the 3-strand crossover with the patience she had developed, doing night obs on a ward full of people who were scared and needed gentleness more than efficiency. Christian stood in the doorway for a while. Neither of them noticed. He told her later, when Elisa was asleep and they were in the kitchen, that he had stood there for almost 10 minutes. You talked to her the whole time, he said. Even when she got frustrated, she was frustrated because she kept losing the 3rd strand. That's normal. It means she's trying. He looked at her across the kitchen island with that particular quality of attention she had noticed from the first night. Full, unhurried, the kind that most people only gave to things they were worried about. What do you do when you're not working? He asked. Sleep, Nadia said. Read when I have the energy. Medical literature, mostly. Old journals. Unusual case studies. She looked at her tea. I can't afford the new textbooks, so I buy the old ones at second-hand shops. That's where I read about the penicillin reactions, a 1987 case study from a Montreal pediatric unit. They almost missed it the same way. He was quiet for a moment, then. You learned how to save my daughter's life from a second-hand textbook. I learned how to recognize a pattern, she said. The pattern was already there. I just knew to look for it. Christian set down his coffee. The man who altered the chart, he said, shifting. We've identified him. A systems administrator at St. Michael's. He had significant financial problems and he was paid to make the change. He paused. He was paid by my business partner, who has been quietly positioning himself to take over a significant portion of my holdings. Elisa is the primary inheritor of my estate. If she predeceased me, he stopped. He would have a clearer path, Nadia said. Yes. What happens now? Stefan has been dealt with, Christian said, in the tone that meant she should not ask for specifics, and she found, to her own surprise, that she didn't want them. The administrator has been turned over to the relevant authorities. I have been informed there will be charges. Nadia nodded. She didn't ask which relevant authorities. She understood by now that relevant in Christian Mansetti's world covered a broader territory than it did in hers. And the hospital? She asked. St. Michael's will be receiving a significant donation contingent on a full review of their secondary documentation protocols and mandatory cross-referencing requirements for all IV antibiotic administration changes. He said it without particular emphasis, the way a man announces a thing he has already decided. They will comply. That's good, Nadia said. It would not have happened without you raising the flag in the first place. It would have been better if I'd been louder about it. Yes, he didn't soften that. She liked that he didn't soften it. And next time, you will be. She looked at him. What makes you think there's a next time? He looked back at her. I'd like there to be one. The room was very quiet. The lake outside had gone dark. The only light was the kitchen overhead, warm and ordinary, and it made the whole conversation feel like something that could only happen in a place where the regular rules didn't quite apply. I have a job, Nadia said. I have a life, You have a brother on dialysis, a flat in Etobicoke that you split with someone you've barely met, and second-hand shoes that need replacing. He said it without cruelty, the same matter-of-fact delivery he'd used on everything else. And you are the most capable person I have encountered in a decade of employing capable people. He paused. I'm not offering you a position out of obligation. I'm offering it because Elisa asks for you before she asks for Dr. Abina, and because I have a board meeting next Tuesday in which I am about to be outmaneuvered by 3 men who think I don't see the documentation gaps in their projections, and I suspect you would see them. Nadia blinked. I'm a nurse. You're someone who reads everything and asks the right questions and doesn't stop until she has an answer. He turned his coffee cup in his hands. The specific field is secondary. She was quiet for a long time. Outside, a bird called once from the direction of the lake and was answered by nothing. I want Kofi's dialysis covered, she said. Fully. Transport, treatment, medication, everything. Done. I want to keep my nursing registration active. I won't abandon that. I wouldn't ask you to. And I want it on record that when I disagree with you, I say so. Directly. Without consequences. On record with whom? With you. He held her gaze. Agreed. She nodded once. Then we have a second deal, Mr. Mansetti. Christian. She considered this. Not yet, she said. He almost smiled again. He was getting better at it. The months that followed rearranged Nadia's understanding of what her life could look like. She moved to a guest suite on the property while Elisa was in recovery. And then, when Elisa recovered fully and they transferred back to Christian's primary residence in Forest Hill, Nadia found that she had somehow become a fixture. She managed Elisa's ongoing care, yes, but she also sat in on 3 board meetings before anyone thought to ask why she was there, by which time she had already caught 2 contractual discrepancies that saved the Mansetti group a significant sum, and Christian had simply turned to the room and said, she stays. She learned that Elisa was fierce and funny and terrible at losing at cards and extraordinary at finding every injured animal within a kilometer radius and bringing them home. She learned that Christian worked 18-hour days and ate dinner with Elisa every single night without exception, even when it meant the meal was at 10:30 at night because they were both still awake. She learned that he had a habit of standing at windows when he was worried, and a different habit, when he thought no one was watching, of reading to Elisa from a battered paperback copy of The Phantom Tollbooth that had clearly been read so many times the spine had given up. She learned that he laughed very rarely, but when he did, it was the kind of laugh that made the room feel like something had loosened inside it. 4 months after the hospital, he found her at midnight in the library, sitting on the floor with a stack of journals, her reading glasses crooked and a half-eaten piece of toast on the armchair beside her. He stood in the doorway and looked at her for a moment, and then said, without preamble, "Come with me." He took her out to the dock behind the Forest Hill house, which backed onto a small private pond that should not have existed in the middle of the city, but did, in the way that money sometimes bends geography. It was February. The pond was frozen. The sky was clear and very black and very full. "I never asked you," he said, "why you kept the rabbit in your pocket." Nadia looked at the ice. Because she asked for him every morning before her eyes were open. There was no reason to make her wait. You did that before you knew who her father was. I did it because she was 7 and she was scared. He turned to look at her. The cold had turned his breath to small clouds. "I have spent 15 years, he said, in a world where everyone around me has an angle, a position, something they want from the next interaction." He paused. "You asked for your patient's safety. That was it. That was what I needed," Nadia said. "I know." He was quiet for a moment. The ice made a low settling sound beneath them, the specific groan of a frozen thing holding. "I would like to tell you something that I haven't told anyone since Elisa's mother died. And I'm telling you because you are the only person in my life who I've trusted to hear it without doing anything with it except understand it." Nadia waited. "I'm tired," Christian said. Simply. Completely. "I have been doing this for a very long time, and I am tired, and the only time it doesn't feel that way is when I'm in the same room as my daughter. Or you." The cold settled around them. The pond was silver blue in the dark. "That's a significant thing to say," Nadia said. "I know. I'm a nurse from Sudbury. I know that too." She looked at him. He was looking back at her with that full, unhurried attention, and she understood, with the particular clarity of a very cold night, that this was not going to resolve itself into something simple, that it was going to be complicated and strange, and that the world he operated in carried real weight and real danger, and that she had seen enough of both to know what she was walking toward. She also understood that she had already been walking toward it for 4 months. "Okay," she said. "Okay? You told me something real. I'm acknowledging it." She looked back at the pond. "That's what you do when someone tells you something real." He was quiet for a moment. Then, carefully, he reached out and took her hand, not urgently, not with any particular drama. Just the way you take someone's hand when the ground is uncertain, and you want them to know they have something to hold. They stood there on the dock until the cold became too much, and Mrs. Kamau appeared at the door with 2 cups of something hot and the expression of a woman who had been waiting for this for quite some time. The charity gala at the ROM came in March. Nadia stood in front of the mirror in the bedroom that had become, over the course of 4 months, simply hers, and looked at the dress that had been laid out while she was in the bath. It was deep green silk, the kind that moved when you moved and settled when you settled. She did not own anything like it. She owned scrubs and jeans and 2 blouses for job interviews. Elisa came in without knocking, which was also now a habit, and sat on the edge of the bed with her chin in her hands. "You look like a whole entire person," Elisa announced. "Thank you," Nadia said. "I was worried I only looked like a partial one." Elisa giggled. "Then, Dad said you're coming with us tonight. That's the plan." "Like coming with us how?" Nadia turned from the mirror. "What do you mean, how?" Elisa gave her the look of a 7-year-old who found adults complicated and somewhat slow. "Like coming with us like you work for us. Or coming with us like you're ours." The word ours landed somewhere in Nadia's chest and stayed there. "What would you like?" Nadia asked. Elisa thought about it seriously, the way she thought about most things. "The second one," she said. "Because I already have people who work for us. I don't have enough people who are ours." Nadia sat down next to her on the bed. She had no idea what to say to that, so she said nothing, and instead put her arm around Elisa's shoulders, and Elisa leaned in, and they sat like that for a while in the green silk quiet of the room until Christian appeared in the doorway wearing a tuxedo, and looked at the 2 of them together with an expression that he forgot to conceal before Nadia saw it. The gala was everything she expected and several things she didn't. She expected the wealth. She expected the architecture of the ROM's galleries draped in white and candlelight, the way money made old bones beautiful. She did not expect to enjoy it. She found that she did, in the specific way that you enjoy something when you are seeing it clearly, rather than trying to perform the correct response to it. She talked to a surgeon from Toronto General about a dialysis advancement that had implications for patients like Kofi. She talked to a city councillor about a housing initiative that she thought was misstructured and said so directly, and the councillor blinked and then agreed with her. She stood beside Christian when he needed her to, and 3 steps away when he didn't, and she found the calibration of it came naturally, the way it did when you were used to reading a room and adjusting accordingly. Dr. Harrison Webb was there. He saw Nadia across the gallery and turned the color of old chalk. She walked over to him. "Dr. Webb," she said pleasantly. "Mrs. Okafor." He was sweating despite the air conditioning. "I understand you've transitioned out of St. Michael's." "I have." She tilted her head. "I also understand the hospital has adopted a mandatory cross-referencing protocol for all IV medication changes in pediatrics." She smiled. "I think that's wonderful progress." He said something indistinct and excused himself, and she watched him go and felt the very clean satisfaction of a thing that was precisely measured. Christian appeared at her shoulder. "That was elegant," he said quietly. "I didn't raise my voice," she said. "I didn't have to." He looked at her the way he had looked at her on the dock. "No," he said. "You didn't." A year after the night in the hospital, Christian asked her to marry him on the dock, in the same place where he had first told her the real thing. It was October again, the lake just beginning to think about freezing, the sky doing the particular thing that Canadian autumn skies do, where they look like someone painted them too intensely and forgot to blend the edges. He did not have a ring ready. He had been planning to have one ready, and then Elisa had told him, unsolicited at breakfast, that Nadia had mentioned once that she found most engagement rings uncomfortable for practical reasons, so he had waited, and instead he brought Nadia to the dock and said, plainly, that he had been alone for a long time, and was very good at it, and was no longer interested in being good at it, if she would consider staying. She said yes before he'd finished the sentence. He looked so surprised by this that she laughed, and the laugh startled a heron off the opposite shore, and it lifted into the cold sky in one long unfolding movement, and was gone. They went back inside, and Elisa was sitting on the stairs pretending she had not been listening and doing a poor job of it. "Well?" Elisa demanded. "She said yes," Christian said. Elisa pumped her fist. 3 years later. The kitchen in the Forest Hill house at 7 in the morning smelled of coffee and burnt toast. Elisa, now 10 and catastrophically opinionated, was at the island doing homework she had forgotten until this moment, her dark curls falling forward over the textbook. Humphrey sat on the counter beside her, slightly threadbare now, his second ear also restitched. There was a baby monitor on the counter. Nadia sat at the table with both hands around a mug and her reading glasses on, and a file open in front of her. She was on the board of a children's medical foundation now, the one she had insisted be structured around practical nursing input rather than just physician leadership. And the annual report was due in 2 weeks. Christian came downstairs and kissed the top of her head, and then the top of Elisa's head, and then picked up his phone, and was already in the first conversation of the day by the time he reached the coffee machine. He caught Nadia's eye over the phone and lifted an eyebrow. She shook her head. Nothing urgent. He nodded and kept talking. The baby monitor crackled. Nadia was up before it crackled a second time. There was a baby in the house now, 9 months old and built like a small, determined boulder, with Christian's dark eyes and Nadia's habit of examining everything she was handed before accepting it. They had named her Clara, because Elisa had asked to choose, and Clara was the name of the protagonist of a book they had read together, and Elisa said it suited her, because Clara in the book was also deceptively powerful. Nadia lifted her daughter from the crib and stood at the window while Clara decided whether she was happy or unhappy about being awake. The morning light was coming in sideways and the lake was still, and the frost on the dock caught it, and made the whole view look like something illustrated rather than real. She thought sometimes about the supply room, the saline bags, the overhead PA crackling to life at 11:47, and her running down the corridor without knowing what she was running toward. She thought about the second-hand textbook from a Montreal pediatric unit, 1987, that she had bought for $3 at a shop on Bloor Street because she couldn't afford the new one. She thought about the note she had entered into the secondary system, quietly at 11:30 on a Tuesday night, because a little girl had told her about a dentist and a throat that shrank. She thought about what it meant to see something. Really see it. To look at the thing in front of you, not the category it belonged to or the expertise you were supposed to have about it, but the actual thing, the actual person, the actual child with the actual rabbit in her actual hand. She pressed her nose to the top of Clara's head, which smelled of sleep and something warm and entirely particular to her. Downstairs, Elisa's chair scraped back, and there was the sound of a school bag being frantically packed, and Christian's voice saying something dry and calm that made Elisa groan and then laugh. The morning light moved on the frost. Clara wrapped her hand around Nadia's collar and held on. Outside, Toronto was waking up and getting about its business, enormous and ordinary, and completely indifferent to the fact that 3 years ago a practical nurse with second-hand shoes and $70 and a braid too tight had walked into the wrong room at the right moment and refused to look away from what she saw. She had not been the most qualified person in that room. She had simply been the one who was paying attention. As it turned out, that was the thing that mattered.